So in this session, I'm going to talk about a particular issue that I found out. It's not an issue with the Echo framework, and it's not an issue exactly with this HTTP test utility either. But it's when you use both of them together, the Echo framework and HTTP test, you have to be aware of a couple of things. And I'll give an example of that by, you know, executing a particular integration test. Okay. Now, before I run this, let me just tell you that I've gone ahead and made some changes to our test cases. So I have gone ahead and written the test cases for users, and I don't think I need to run through those test cases because we already covered the product test cases, and these are pretty much similar. I've also done some cleaning around the unit test and our code. So, for example, I've got all the validators in one place in this validators.go file. So I've got this validator which is being used in products and users for validating because it's part of the same package, so it is accessible. And I've got the validator structs here for both product and users here. Okay, so that's one change. Another change is in the common.test.go file which I created. I've put some common things related to test. For example, the common variables like client, DB. So this is integration test, right? So we are initializing these variables like client, collection, and even the index here before we run the test. We also got our test main method. Okay, having said that, let's move to the issue that I was talking about. Okay, so I have a test case here that says that test creation of the user when the data is invalid. So this is an unhappy scenario. Okay, so that should fail. I'm sending some data that is invalid. Why is it invalid? Because the password that I'm sending does not adhere to the requirement of minimum at 8 characters, right? So it's going to fail. So I'm doing some test here. I'm preparing the request, preparing the response, setting the headers, creating a new echo struct, creating the new context with request and response, calling create user method on the user's handler. Okay, and asserting that there would be an error, and asserting that the response code would be bad request. Now if you come back here in the user's code, okay, I have this user's handler create user. Okay, so if the requested payload is invalid, it's going to come down here and fail, right? I'm returning the error here. So error would not be nil, and that's what I'm checking for here. Okay, so let me just go ahead and execute this unit test and let's see. But I'm not going to run just this one unit test case alone. Just gonna fire some common commands. So that is this. So go test minus v dot slash triple dot. So this would allow me to execute all the tests that are inside anywhere from the root folder because I'm at the root folder right now. I'm not inside handlers. So let me execute that. So now you see that it has failed, and it's very odd because it's pointing me to line number 32, which is here. It's saying that it was expecting 400, which is what I had told it to expect, that expect a 400 bad request response code. But it got 200. How is it possible? At the same time, it asserted the error was not nil. I mean, it said that there was an error, but it still said the response code is 200. Now, that is kind of very odd. So let's see what's happening here. So let me just make a small change here so that now that I've removed this not nil condition, you'd be able to see what the error looks like here. And so we can be sure that it is sending the right error. Okay, so I'm going to run this again. And this time, two particular things are failing. So one that was already failing, another one where it was expecting nil for the error, but it got this response. So I am sending 400 back. Okay, so why is it getting 200 back? Now that seems odd, right? And the reason why it is happening is because when you use HTTP test new recorder, the response does not get failed when you're using the echo new HTTP error to return new errors. Okay, and that is why the response object does not get filled. The error object gets filled, but the response object, the actual HTTP response object, does not get filled. Okay, and that's why it assumes the default value. So if you click here, you'll find out that the default value is 200 code, and that is why this fails. So this is kind of odd, and this is where I think we'll have to change some of our error handling a little bit, not too much. Okay, and I will also have to change our integration test to match that. Okay, and this is probably more noticeable when you have some unhappy scenarios. In the happy scenarios, everything is just good. Okay, no problem. So let's check it out. Okay, so what's happening here is I'm now I'll be expecting the error to be nil. Okay, so I'm not going to change this, but in my code here, I'm going to get rid of this. Okay, and I'm going to replace it with c dot json. Sorry, JSON, and here I'm going to send it status bad request. So when you use c.json, it is actually filling up the response, right? So that's why we use that. And I'm just going to type here unable to validate the request body. That's my message. Okay. Now when I click save, okay, when I execute it, okay, so this time it failed, but in a different place. And I'm gonna check that up. Okay, so I think it failed at a couple of places, and that is because, okay, unable to validate the request body. That's fine. A user already exists. So I think there's a couple of things that we need to change. All right, so let me just run this again, and okay. So in the other use cases, for example, I'm trying. This is also an unhappy scenario. I'm trying to recreate the user, okay, that has already been created. So this should also fail. All right. So I'm going to change this back to nil, and I'm going to expect this to be a bad request as well because the user has already been created. So I'm going to come back here, okay, and I'm going to change this as well, this particular. So here I'm actually returning HTTP error. And HTTP error is something that I get out of insert error. And insert user. And insert user has this return signature that it returns. You can see that it returns HTTP error. All right, so I can't just return it back. We just discussed, right? I think okay. So the problem was this return thing. I was missing the return, and that's why we had these problems here. Let me run this again. Okay, so it is failing but at a different place. Okay, and that's the one that we are right now working on, but it had succeeded with the others one. Sorry, I think it was okay. So what I'm checking for here is I'll have to come back and change this to c.json, and now I need to send the response back, the response code and the response message. Now how do I get it? Well, I have it in the HTTP error itself. Because it is of type echo HTTP error, it already has the code and it already has the message that I want. Alright, and when I save this now, and when I run my test case, it's all good. It's okay, it's passed. Right, so this is something that I wanted to get across to you, and I think I'm going to have to make changes to our file accordingly. So I'm going to change our error handling uh, back to c.json. Not to say that this was a bad way of handling errors, okay, this is perfectly valid, but it may not work with your HTTP test utility here. Alright, so I paused the video there for a while and I went ahead and made the changes. Okay, so the change that I've made is I have introduced a new struct for error message, and I also given it the JSON tagging. There's a message field and it will be known as message, and that is because now because we'll be sending a JSON error instead of the standard echo HTTP error as part of our response, and that is because we found that issue with HTTP test utility, right? So that's why in all our handler functions, all our public handler functions, we will now be returning a c.json as opposed to echo.HTTPError. Okay, when there's a there's a faulty scenario, when there's a bad use case. Okay, so uh, it's nothing new. So you just pass the code and you pass the message, but instead of message we pass the struct error message with the message field being that particular string. And we have to do this because we are passing a JSON. If you don't do that, then you'll just be passing the plain string as part of your error, and that's not something you want to do, right? So because we are passing JSON, we should be passing something that's a value JSON, right? So basically, that's one change that I've gone ahead and made at all the places in users as well as in products.go. All right. So this is kind of a diversion from what we discussed in one of the previous sessions on logging and error handling. So we talked about that the logging, the error handling is going to be based on a new HTTP error, but turns out that we are not going to use that in our handler function. We'll be passing the message, we'll be passing the response code in case of errors with c.json and not echo HTTP error from now on, and that's because we can't get it to work with HTTP test utility. All right, so I hope that's clear to you. There's another thing, a small thing that I wanted to get across to you. So in our main.go file, if you notice that for calling some of the endpoints, for example get, delete and post, put, delete and post, we need a JWT token. But when I execute the test case now, and that's actually all the test cases, including the product test cases, where I haven't added any support for JWT token, all right? I'm not actually creating any mock JWT token and passing it. I'm not doing that. Then how come these tests are passing? It's passing, right? The reason is that in my integration test, I'm calling the handler functions in isolation. Okay, so all the magic of JWT validation is happening in the JWT middleware layer here. But the handler functions are completely independent of what could be happening in the middleware, and they don't really care about it. They don't have any explicit handling of the JWT token. Okay, yeah, they do create the JWT token and send it in the response header, which I do check for in my product.test. For example, uh, I am checking for, let's say in auth, not in users test, for example, x auth. All right, yeah. So for example, I'm getting the token back and I'm just validating that it's not empty. So I'm doing checks like that. But other than that, I'm not actually uh, my test cases, my integration test cases don't have to deal with uh, the JWT token validation because I'm testing them in isolation. I hope that point is clear. All right, because uh, in our unit test, what we are doing is we are directly calling the handler function, right? So, for example, the create products, the handler function is getting invoked directly. Okay, so we are not going through the route of this, where the JWT middlewares get inserted and then injected and validated. We are calling the handler function directly. So that is why they would pass. So I hope that point is clear to you. I think I've done my best to sort of elaborate that point, but I think it's a fairly simple one. Okay, so now that we have this kind of error handling in place, what you should expect is, let's say, if you try to get a product that doesn't exist, okay, and I think I should keep my server running, for example. So right now, if I try to list the product that doesn't exist, it's gonna say that it's unable to find the product. Okay, so that's the message. So initially it used to be just a plain string outside of any JSON structure. But now it's the proper JSON structure, and that is fine because that's kind of the default response of Echo framework as well. So for example, I try to access the endpoint that doesn't exist, okay? So it says that message not found. And this is coming from Echo framework. This is not me. This is not our code. All right. So we are trying to sort of comply with the message formatting that Echo already has, so that it's kind of familiar and consistent across the code base. All right. So those were the couple of points that I wanted to cover, and I think I've covered enough. So now in the next session, now that our application is ready, we will try to Dockerize our application. So we'll see how this application, or any application, any Go application for that matter, can be Dockerized. Okay, and we'll write a Docker file and create an image and publish it onto our Docker Hub account. All right, so thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next session. Bye.